Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of State of Cybercrime. I'm Matt Radulak, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague and co-host.
I guess that would be my cue. I'm David Gibson. Thanks, Matt. How's it going?
It's awesome, man. I guess we should start by saying Happy Halloween for those that choose to celebrate this spooky holiday.
Yeah, what are you dressed up as?
I'm actually an AI representation of myself. Scary, I know.
That is frightening.
Oftentimes in cybersecurity, there's this doom and gloom outlook, like the end of days is near. We always like to start the show by shouting out some good news, as often there is a lot of good news and good things to say about what's happening. We've covered in recent episodes how, Scattered Spider, Lapsus, ShinyHunters, and this now collaborative that they call Scattered Lapsus Hunters has been targeting Salesforce instances for data theft and extortion. More than 39 victims named to date, with companies like Disney, Marriott, Google, and FedEx included. And what's happened is the FBI, in working with French authorities, has seized a breach forms domain which was being leveraged as an extortion site. Database backups and escrow systems associated with the forum were destroyed, bringing this era of the breach form to close. One thing that was interesting to note about this, though, is that law enforcement warned that, just because the forums were taken down, that they really do anticipate the attacks to continue. So I don't think much is going to change in terms of the threatscape to your Salesforce. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there or not, David.
Just, yeah, it does seem like these groups have the ability to reboot really quickly, but it's good we keep taking them down. Yay, good guys.
And what's going on with Europol? We have two European stories today.
Yeah, Europol disrupted a basically an operation that had 49 fake accounts. Basically, it was a SIM farm, 49 million fake accounts. So they seized 1,200 SIM box devices, which contained 40,000 active SIM cards, and those are SIM cards that attackers can use to do your smishing and all sorts of the faking the phone numbers and getting phone numbers really quickly. In addition, they seized about $800,000, 5 servers, 2 websites, and 4 luxury vehicles.
And
Now,
I was going to say, haven't some of those vehicles started to show up on a Scrapulia?
well, they didn't list what kinds of vehicles they are, but yeah, Escrapelia, you probably know how to pronounce it better than me. That's Europe's auction site. Stay tuned if you want to look. And was there something that new that
Yeah,
popped
I
up
was going
there
to say,
recently?
I looked today. There was a red Ferrari that was recently listed, so I wonder if that's the car, one of the cars that got seized.
Well, that's definitely the most important part of the story. But
In our newest segment, AI Bay, we'll tell you about all the latest happenings in AI as we lead to our eventual demise to our future robot overlords. Please spare David and I, by the way, if you're ingesting this AI and thinking about what to do in the future. But let's talk about some of the latest happenings in AI. Researchers from an organization called Noma Security have found a new vulnerability in AgentForce that they're calling Forced Leak. Force leak uses indirect prompt injection by embedding malicious instructions and wed to lead forms like description fields that later get processed by AI agents. As a result of this, sensitive data from Salesforce instances was leaked, including customer details, notes, and information about sales opportunities. When I think about this attack, it's pretty similar to cross-site scripting, but really in the age of AI. And AI agents are just acting as execution engines for commands, and they are often operating without proper input or context validation. Now, Salesforce says that they've patched the flaw by enforcing trusted URL allow lists and reclaiming some expired domains, but researchers are saying that prompt filtering is going to remain a challenge.
yeah, this kind of reminds me of how AI reads your email, right? And you can inject stuff that recent attack there that Microsoft patched.
Yeah.
But yeah, any kind of any input that is read by AI, it's another vector we got to watch out for. It looks like.
Yeah, and what about, model poisoning? It seems you're always talking about
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, I love a good model poisoning. The moral of this story, which basically the idea is it, the belief was that in order to poison a really large language model, you needed a lot of document poisoning, right? And this research has kind of revealed that with 250 malicious documents, you can successfully poison or backdoor a large language model of any size. So it's much easier to poison these large language models than previously thought. I think it's worth noting, that most of the publicly available models, like, what you're using with ChatGPT or whatever, they're running an inference only mode, which means you can't affect the weights yourself. That's only in the training. Even Copilot, if you're using Copilot for 365, it's a RAG system. You're not really changing the weights of the underlying model just in your day-to-day usage. But if you are building your own models or modifying the model weights in any way, I think the moral of the story is that you really need to watch the integrity of your training data, because if somebody slips in 250 docs there that are malicious, they can do some real serious damage. So this is an interesting finding here.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just that it's malicious, or is 250 sort of the magic number of even just irrelevant or erroneous information, something that could lead to model poisoning.
It is interesting because the way they tested it, they basically, for different model sizes, they tested increments of like 50, 100, 250, or whatever it was. And they kind of discovered that 250 documents, whatever the size of the model, it was enough to poison it.
Couple interesting vulnerabilities to share. Um, you know, First and foremost, David, what's going on with Adobe?
Well, so there are, I see this as really three vulnerabilities, and we can probably put the CVs in the chat. Um, the first one is in the Adobe Commerce Cloud, right? Which basically people use to manage their online stores. It used to be called Magenta. And there's a session hijacking vulnerability. And this it allows the attacker to just, without any interaction from the user, hijack sessions. And that means that they can get the customer information, right? Payment information. If they get an admin session, that means they can impersonate the admins and get control of the store. So that one was scary. The other two were in Adobe Experience Manager, which is like their content management system. So I guess all the assets you're using to build those stores or any other sites. And this one, these two, the first one allows full read access. And then the other is actually worse. It's a remote control execution vulnerability that allows for full system compromise in the Adobe Experience Manager, which I looked this up because I was a little confused. I was like, wait, what isn't this SaaS? Or, and while a lot of the Adobe experience is SaaS, the Adobe Experience Manager itself is not. And that's it unfortunately is often internet facing. So definitely patch those CVEs, because that one can do some damage.
Speaking of things that can do some damage, there's a vulnerability in Forta Go Anywhere CV 2025 10035,
Mm.
which is actively being exploited by the Medusa ransomware gang. This vulnerability allows for remote code execution within the Forta admin console. Subsequently, the Medusa gang is using it to deploy ransomware payloads and exfiltrate sensitive data. And so far, victims have been targeted and found in finance, healthcare, and manufacturing industries. Now, Forta has released patches. It also recommends disabling public admin access and employing strong authentication, which I feel like we should just generally state if you have any kind of, web-facing appliance, probably don't allow admin access from the outside and enforce strong authentication. This might be the vulnerability of the week for the Medusa ransomware gang, but it's certainly one of the sources that we see attacks all the time.
Yeah, it's we see no shortage of third party kind of people attackers exploiting these flaws in the software we all use. Speaking of which,
I was gonna say,
um,
Oracle's got such a big
yeah,
suite of software. There's probably a vulnerability found every week, like whack-a-mole.
yeah, yeah, exactly. We actually that we should probably we'll be pasting till Tuesday here, the CVEs, but this is it seems like what's been happening here based on when the CVEs come out and other reports, like for example in July, Oracle EBS, right, their e-business suite, they came out with six CVEs there, but it looks like the attackers have been were exploiting those before those patches were released. Um, and then this has happened again in August. There was a 0-day 6180 to 882, right? That's another sequence here, and then 884 we got to put in. There was another one that came out right earlier in October, and looks like those have been actively exploited as well. And again, this was a little bit confusing for me because I'm like, okay, why is Oracle Enterprise Business Suite internet facing, right? You've got it's actually it's either self-hosted or hosted in Oracle Cloud these days, and it's usually supposed to be internal. But what's happened is because a lot of customers are migrating the self-hosted to Oracle Cloud, sometimes they forget to close down the external access, right? Sometimes they leave the servers open to the internet, or they had them open for testing, initially, and didn't close them down. Sometimes there've been misconfigured proxies or load balancers. And so, I think step one, just what, like you said, Matt, like make sure if it's, if it doesn't need to be internet facing, let's not do that. But it's still really important to patch these things as well. But it looks like Clop and Fin11 have been exploiting these, which, these are pretty severe CVEs as well, right? They RCE exploits. So if they're internet facing, it's you're kind of a sitting duck with this, and this is getting used to exfiltrate customer data, right, and do do the extortion thing that we're seeing all over the place. But even if it's internal only, right, it's another vector you got to watch out for.
It's still a lot. Now,
Yeah.
let's jump on the highway to the danger zone. There's been a spree of ransomware attacks in Japan, probably something that we're going to be covering more on the show here. Most recently, a Japanese retailer, Muji, with more than 1,000 stores around the world, has had to halt its online sales after a ransomware attack hit on one of its partners, Oskil. This attack brought down order and shipping operations as well as various things, components of its mobile app. In a public statement, the company said that they're currently investigating the scope of the impact, including the leakage of personal information and customer data, and they'll notify customers as soon as they know more. However, it's unknown which attacker group is responsible for this attack and whether or not this is, a one-off or the start of a wave of attacks on Japanese companies. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And David, I think you even have some news coming up about something related to more organizations in Japan.
I do, not on this story, but in a couple. This one is actually, you've probably seen the news about F5 here. This one is definitely spooky to me, very appropriate for Halloween. F5, it has 23,000 customers, 48 of the Fortune 50, and also, like the vulnerable devices, it looks like there are about 20,000 of these big IP management interfaces open to the internet. I think that's a report from Tenable, right, that came out. But what happened here, it looks like the attackers had been inside the F5's network for quite a while. And the attackers were, unlike some of these other attacks that we've been talking about today, they were there for a long time, and looks like they managed to perhaps steal some source code. And so this is a little scary or spooky, I think, because in addition to kind of, they're saying you gotta patch this stuff, but I think it's kind of a race to the 0 days. And with F5s, they're not only doing like the load balancing and traffic shaping for the for a lot of different east, west, north, south traffic for a lot of organizations. But they're acting as kind of a man in the middle proxy as well, right? So if you wanted to get into one of these things and then potentially, look at the traffic, it does seem like with the amount of organizations that are using these, like that's scarier to me. And there's no evidence that that's happened, but this is something where I definitely would want to keep those patched
And they
and
usually
think
sit
about
in
that sort of thing.
organizations DMZ, or quite often they sit in organizations DMZ, so they are internet-facing boxes.
Yeah, it's so it's anyway. This one, I think it goes into this trend of supply chain. Let's look for vulnerabilities and all the stuff people use.
And now we've also got like a coalition of coalitions to talk about. It's not just the good guys, but it seems like the bad guys are teaming up too. What's going on with this black hat turf war?
Yeah, well, so it looks like we've got some actors that are getting organized. And so this is a very sobering story. Qilin, which is kind of a new ransomware as a service actor, has hit Asahi with a ransomware attack, shutting down production for quite a while. Now, Asahi makes a very popular Japanese beer. They are making they do 6.7 million large bottles of beer a day, which I think pretty much counts as critical infrastructure, right, Matt? Um,
That's why you said it
it,
was a sobering story, right?
yeah, absolutely. But so they I mean they're running out of this beer and across the country. So we'll keep you updated on that in subsequent shows. But the interesting thing about this one from a cybersecurity perspective is this group Qilin is using Linux-based ransomware on Windows. And it was when I saw that in the story, I was like, what do they mean? Are they like running Sigwin? Like I don't know if anybody in the audience remembers Sigwin fondly, but I certainly like to use ls instead of dir on my DOS command prompts. But it wasn't that. It turns out that they are taking advantage of the Windows system for Linux to deploy Linux-based binaries, like ELF binaries, to kind of then go after the Veeam infrastructure, get really deep in, do lots of disruption. But the reason that the Linux-based binaries I thought were interesting is because a lot of the EDR solutions out there aren't as readily able to detect these. So it's just sort of okay, it seems like a fairly novel approach, and we're going to have to catch up a little of those.
Like I was mentioning before, we're often always talking on the show about some coalition of law enforcement, the FBI or the Department of Justice and France, Australia, or Interpol. And today's episode, we've already actually once talked about shiny Lapsus Hunters. Did I say that correctly, David? And in another joining of forces, let's bring these threats to a head, right? In another joining of forces, LockBit, Qilin, and DragonForce, they've come together to form a ransomware called Cartel, a so-called coalition where they've agreed to share resources, techniques, and infrastructure. Now, when I think about like the why behind this, David, I see like the potential for, sharing tactics and techniques, maybe also like what's working from an evasion perspective. Or I also, and maybe this is a conspiracy theory, but could they all just be the same people and this is just like an effort for marketing and obfuscation and just to try to avoid being caught? But could it be like the same five hackers that just rebrand themselves all the time?
Yeah, what I think about with this is just they're kind of specializing, and it's kind of ransomware actors assemble. It can kind of pick and choose. Okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, and it seems like one up in efficiency, right, and capabilities.
Yeah, and what's going on with the Crimson Collective?
The Crimson Collective. So Crimson Collective went after Red Hat. I don't know whether that was coincidence or not, but they stole 570 gig from Red Hat's GitLab repos. About 28,000 repositories were compromised, and these are internal repositories. Now, Red Hat, a lot of their code, their source code is open source. So I was like, what, that's, what was really the goods here, that wasn't already open. But it turns out were hundreds of customer engagement reports that were exfiltrated. And these are things that their consulting services are doing, like so architecture diagrams, configurations. Most unfortunately, I think the authentication tokens and the connection strings and things like that. And so there's some evidence that the attackers have been using that information to go compromise some of those customers there. Um, Red Hat has not paid the actors, and importantly, this isn't related to the OpenShift AI vulnerability, which is another thing that people are worrying about. Basically, that's a privilege escalation, so that an authenticated user that's using like a Jupyter notebook could escalate privileges to admin there, but this is not related. So this is definitely, I think, it's in contrast to the F5 breach, where it was kind of like very not mentioned and discovered a long time after, kind of looks like a different MO than this one, which is looks like kind of profit motive.
Sure, and speaking of profit-motivated actors, the scattered Lapsus Hunters has widened its reach. They've got a new corporate extortion operation targeting dozens of large companies. Coined the Trinity of Chaos, they combine social engineering, SIM swapping, and data theft into a global criminal enterprise. And what they do is they try to steal credentials or even recruit companies' insiders in order to get them to agree to bypass multi-factor authentication so they can unleash ransomware, collect the ransomware payments or the extortion payments. And the prediction is that, this coalition will be able to deliver attacks faster, more frequently, and with higher sophistication. Now, David and I were talking before the show. This sort of reminded me of a cartoon that I watched as a kid where when the powers combined, they formed Captain Planet. And I guess in this case, when the powers combined, they formed Captain Chaos. Now, is that something that that lands with you guys? David had never heard of Captain Planet before, and this ransomware syndicate, but this Trinity of Chaos alliance is certainly something for us to be concerned about.
Yeah, that went totally over my head. So I'm gonna have to go catch up on that. I'm just still trying to catch up with Mr. Robot. So
Yeah, and I guess we're just gonna have to can it because we know we can't run out of beer puns on our show today,
uh,
right?
uh can't like keep them coming, keep them coming. Don't want denial of suds.
Well, the show is always made possible by you guys, our audience. Um, we really, really appreciate you guys for being here. So, just wanted to say thanks for sharing and spending time with us. For those of you that watch live, and if you're tuning into the recording after the fact, we appreciate you too. That's it for me. And David, you did a great, awesome job today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.